I'm Samantha, 28, and I still remember that night perfectly. We were having dinner at my parents' house when they handed my sister Megan a check that made her eyes widen. When I asked about it, my dad simply said, "Your sister deserves it." My mom nodded in agreement. The $75,000 check wobbled in Megan's fingers while I sat there invisible as always, despite my promotion, my apartment, my degree that I'd earned without their help. It was just another moment in a lifetime of moments, where I was the afterthought, the reliable one who needed nothing while Megan got everything. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from? Like and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, what I did next changed everything. Growing up in Lexington, a wealthy suburb just outside Boston, my family looked perfect from the outside. My mom, Catherine, worked her way up to become a hospital administrator at Massachusetts General, while my dad, Robert, built his construction company from scratch. We lived in a beautiful colonial house with 4 bedrooms and a perfectly manicured lawn. The Reynolds family was the epitome of upper-middle-class success. At least that's what everyone thought. From my earliest memories, there was always a clear distinction between how my parents treated me and how they treated my younger sister Megan. She's only 2 years younger, but somehow that small gap created a canyon of difference in our parents' eyes. When I was 7, I got a small birthday party with 5 friends at the local pizza place. When Megan turned 7, she had a princess-themed extravaganza with a rented bounce house, a magician, and personalized party favors for 20 kids. When I asked my mom why my party had been so much smaller, she patted my head and said, "You're more mature, sweetie. Megan needs more attention." That became the refrain of my childhood. Megan needs more. More new clothes while I got hand-me-downs despite being the older sister. More praise for getting B's while my straight, as were expected. More forgiveness when she broke rules that I'd been punished for violating. "Your sister's more sensitive," my dad would explain when I questioned the double standard. "She needs more encouragement." Meanwhile, I became increasingly self-sufficient, learning early that my achievements were mine alone to celebrate. In high school, I threw myself into academics and extracurriculars, earning a full scholarship to Boston University as valedictorian. My parents came to graduation, of course, but their reaction was subdued. "We always knew you'd do well," my mother said, as if my success were a foregone conclusion rather than the result of countless late nights studying while Megan was out with friends. When Megan barely graduated with a C average, my parents threw her a lavish party. She worked so hard to overcome her challenges, they told everyone, beaming with pride. They paid her full tuition at a private college where she switched majors 3 times before settling on communications. I still remember the Christmas of my junior year of college. I had made Dean's List again while working part-time to cover my expenses. Megan had just been placed on academic probation, yet somehow she received a brand new MacBook Pro while I got a sweater and a gift card. When I asked my dad about it later, he shrugged. "You're doing fine without our help, Sam. Your sister needs more support." After college, I took a job at Palmer & Associates, a prestigious accounting firm in downtown Boston. I worked 60-hour weeks during tax season, earned rapid promotions, and saved enough to buy my own condo by age 26. Meanwhile, Megan bounced between jobs, living in our parents' pool house rent-free while finding herself. It was at Palmer & Associates that I met Tyler Davis, a tax attorney who consulted with our firm. Unlike my family, Tyler really saw me from the beginning. On our 3rd date, he pointed out how I apologized before expressing any opinion. "You don't need to be sorry for existing, Sam," he said, his blue eyes serious. "Your thoughts matter just as much as anyone else's." That comment struck me like a physical blow. I hadn't realized how much my family dynamic had shaped my interactions with everyone around me. Tyler became not just my boyfriend, but my biggest supporter, the first person who seemed to think I deserved just as much as anyone else. Which brings me to that fateful dinner last spring. My parents had called both Megan and me, saying they had something special to announce and wanted both their daughters there. I'd just been promoted to senior accountant, and I thought foolishly it turns out that maybe they wanted to celebrate my achievement. I spent extra time getting ready, wearing a new dress, and bringing an expensive bottle of wine. I even arrived 15 minutes early to help my mom with dinner, as I'd been taught was polite. The wine was placed on the counter without comment. My promotion news was met with, "That's nice, dear." And then I waited, making small talk with my parents for nearly 45 minutes, until Megan finally arrived, breathless and unapologetic about her lateness. "Meggie." My mother rushed to the door when the bell rang, as if my sister were a celebrity guest rather than 45 minutes late. She embraced Megan warmly, while I sat at the already set dining table, the ice in my water glass melting as rapidly as my hopes for the evening. Sorry I'm late, Megan announced, not sounding sorry at all. Traffic was insane and I had to stop for gas. She breezed into the dining room in skinny jeans and a flowing blouse that probably cost more than my dress despite the fact that I was the one with a steady income. Don't worry about it, sweetie, Dad said, pulling out her chair. We wouldn't start without you. The bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon I'd brought, a $75 bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, sat unopened on the counter while Dad poured Megan her favorite Chardonnay. Mine wasn't even a conscious choice anymore. I'd become so accustomed to these small inequities that I barely registered them. So, how's the new apartment? Megan Mom asked as she passed the salad. My sister had recently moved out of the pool house and into an apartment that my parents were subsidizing heavily. It's amazing, my decorator finally found the perfect accent chairs for the living room. They cost a fortune, but they absolutely make the space. I pushed my salad around my plate, biting back the observation that most people's first apartments featured hand-me-down furniture or IKEA. Not professional decorators. That Megan could talk about spending a fortune on chairs while paying half her actual rent was exactly the kind of disconnect that defined our family. What about you, Samantha? How's work? My father's question felt like the obligatory acknowledgement of my existence. Actually, I have some good news, I said, sitting up straighter. I was promoted to senior accountant last week. It came with a nice raise and I'll be managing my own client portfolio. That's nice, dear Mom, said, her eyes already drifting back to Megan. Pass the dressing, would you? Congrats, sis, Megan said, with the quick dismissal of someone checking a box. Anyway, Mom, you won't believe who I ran into at SoulCycle yesterday. And just like that, we were back to all things Megan. I sat through 20 minutes of stories about people I didn't know, fitness classes I couldn't afford the time to take, and social dramas that seemed more suited to high school than adults approaching 30. When my mother finally brought out the main course prime rib, Megan's favorite despite my well-known preference for her lasagna, Dad tapped his glass with his fork. Your mother and I have an announcement, he said, smiling broadly. We've been talking about it for a while, and we've made a decision we're very excited about. My mother reached over to squeeze Megan's hand. My own hands remained in my lap untouched. Megan's been telling us about her idea to open that boutique fitness studio, Dad continued. A combination of yoga, Pilates, and bar classes with a juice bar. We think it's brilliant. My sister beamed while I tried to keep my expression neutral. This was the third brilliant career idea Megan had floated in the past year, after her short-lived interest in becoming a social media influencer and an even briefer experiment with selling luxury skincare products to her friends. So my father said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket, we've decided to help make it happen. He handed the envelope to Megan, who opened it with exaggerated care. When she pulled out the check, her eyes widened. $75,000, she gasped. To get your business off the ground, Mom explained, her voice warm with pride. We know you need proper equipment, a good location, and startup capital. This is... Megan's voice caught with emotion. This is incredible. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Dad replied. We believe in you, and we know you're going to make us proud. I sat frozen, my fork suspended midway to my mouth. $75,000. More than a year's salary for me. More than 3 times what my college scholarship had been worth. More than I had in my savings account after years of careful budgeting. You're giving her $75,000. The words escaped before I could stop them. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me as if surprised to find I was still at the table. Yes, Dad said simply, his tone suggesting this was entirely reasonable. For a business she has no experience in, with no business plan, I couldn't help myself. Dad, Megan's never even worked at a fitness studio, let alone run one. I've been taking classes for years, Megan protested. I know what works and what doesn't. That's not the same as running a business, I said, trying to keep my voice level. There are permits, insurance, staffing, issues, accounting. That's enough, Samantha, my mother interrupted. This is a happy occasion. Don't ruin it with negativity. I'm not being negative, I'm being realistic, I insisted, feeling a lifetime of suppressed frustration bubbling up. When I went to college, I got nothing. I worked through school while Megan partied through hers on your dime. I've saved carefully for years while she's lived rent-free or subsidized. And now you're just handing her $75,000 for a business whim. My father's face hardened. Your sister deserves this opportunity. And I didn't. I didn't deserve help with college, or starting my career, or anything. You've always been self-sufficient, Samantha, my mother said, as if this were a character flaw rather than a trait they'd force me to develop. You've never needed our help. You've always landed on your feet, because I never had a choice." The words came out louder than I intended, years of quiet resentment finally finding voice. "I had to be self-sufficient because you were too busy taking care of Megan." "That's not fair," Megan said, her lower lip trembling in the way that had always guaranteed our parents would rush to her defense. "It's not my fault if you're jealous of me getting to follow my dreams." "Your dreams," I laughed, a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "Megan, 6 months ago, your dream was becoming an Instagram influencer. Before that, it was selling overpriced face creams. How long will the fitness studio be your dream before you move on to the next thing?" "That's enough." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You've always been hard on your sister Samantha. She's creative, she's exploring her options. Not everyone has to follow your rigid, boring path." The word boring hit me like a slap. Was that how they saw my life? My steady job, my reliable habits, my financial responsibility? Boring. "I need some air," I said, pushing back from the table. My appetite was long gone, replaced by a hollow feeling in my chest. "Sam, don't be dramatic," my mother sighed. "Sit down and finish your dinner." But for once, I didn't do what was expected of me. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. "If you walk out now, you're being childish," my father called after me. I paused at the doorway, turning back to look at them one last time. My father's disapproving frown, my mother's exasperated expression, and Megan's smug smile as she clutched the check that represented yet another way our parents had chosen her over me. "Childish would be throwing a tantrum until I get my way," I said quietly. "That's Megan's specialty, not mine. I'm just finally recognizing that nothing I do will ever be enough for you." I walked out into the cool spring evening, closing the door behind me with a soft click that felt more final than a slam. The tears didn't come until I was safely in my car, parked a block away from my parents' house. Then they flooded out in great gasping sobs that shook my entire body. I clutched the steering wheel as if it could somehow anchor me in the storm of emotions I'd kept carefully controlled for most of my life. I'm not sure how long I sat there, but eventually I became aware of my phone buzzing insistently in my purse. With shaking hands I fished it out, expecting to see my mother's name. Instead it was Tyler. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal and failing completely. "Sam, what's wrong?" His concern was immediate. Everything I whispered, and then the whole story came pouring out. The dinner, the check, the dismissal of my feelings, the accusation that I was jealous and dramatic. And finally, the deeper truth that I'd never allowed myself to fully acknowledge. "They don't love me the same way they love her, Tyler. They never have, and they never will." "I'm coming to get you," he said immediately. "You shouldn't drive like this." "No, I'm okay. I'll come to you." I needed the drive to collect myself, to think. "Can I stay at your place tonight? I can't go home yet. I'll just sit there and replay everything." "Of course." "I'll open a bottle of wine." By the time I arrived at Tyler's apartment in Cambridge, I'd moved from devastation to anger. I paced his living room, wine glass in hand, finally giving voice to every inequity I'd cataloged over the years. "When Megan graduated high school, they bought her a car. A brand new Honda Civic," I said, gesturing so emphatically that wine sloshed over the rim of my glass. "Do you know what I got for graduation? A watch. A nice watch, sure, but one that cost a tenth of what her car did. And they acted like I should be grateful." Tyler sat on his couch, giving me space to vent while offering steady support. "That's seriously messed up," he agreed. "And my college graduation. They took us all out to dinner, made a big toast about how proud they were of both their daughters. Both, as if they'd contributed equally to our educations." I shook my head, remembering. Megan spent 6 years getting a 4-year degree that they paid for entirely. I finished in 3.5 years on scholarship while working part-time, and all I got was included in a group toast. "Have you ever confronted them about any of this before tonight?" Tyler asked. I stopped pacing and sank down next to him on the couch. "Not really. Not directly. I've made comments, asked questions, but whenever I do, they make me feel like I'm being petty or ungrateful. Like I should be thanking them for ignoring me because it made me strong and independent. That's gaslighting, Sam. They've trained you to accept being treated as less than." I leaned my head against his shoulder, suddenly exhausted. The worst part is I think they genuinely don't see it. They really believe Megan needs more help, more support, more everything. And they genuinely think I'm fine with scraps of their attention because I've never set their house on fire demanding more. "So what do you want to do now?" Tyler asked, his arm warm around my shoulders. The question hung in the air. What did I want? For the first time, I allowed myself to consider what I needed rather than what would keep the peace or meet others' expectations. "I think I need some distance," I said slowly. I've spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, their attention, their equal love. And tonight made it crystal clear that's never going to happen. Distance sounds healthy, Tyler agreed. I'm not saying I want to cut them off completely, I clarified. But I need to stop showing up to be dismissed, stop calling to be ignored, stop trying so hard for people who can't or won't value me the way I deserve. That's setting boundaries, Sam. It's healthy and long overdue. We stayed up late that night talking through what healthy boundaries might look like. No more weekly family dinners that always centered around Megan. No more dropping everything when my parents called with some minor emergency that they could handle themselves. No more listening to endless stories about my sister's adventures while my own life went unacknowledged. When my phone buzzed with texts from my mother the next morning, "You really hurt your sister's feelings and I don't understand why you can't just be happy for her," I didn't respond immediately as I normally would. Instead, I turned off my phone and went to breakfast with Tyler. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt significant. For once I was putting myself first. Over the next few weeks, I maintained my distance. I let my parents' calls go to voicemail. I declined the usual Sunday dinner invitations with brief texts about being busy with work. I stopped asking about Megan or her fitness studio plans. My mother's texts grew increasingly confused, then irritated. This silent treatment is very immature, Samantha. My father left gruff voicemails about family obligations and getting over yourself. The most revealing response came from Megan herself, who sent a long accusatory text. "I can't believe you're being so jealous and dramatic. It's not my fault Mom and Dad want to help me succeed. Maybe if you weren't such a workaholic robot, they'd be more interested in your life too." I showed the text to Tyler, who had become my rock during this turbulent time. "See how she turns it around. It's my fault they favor her apparently." "Classic deflection," he said. "But you know that's not true, right? You're not responsible for how they treat you." Slowly I was beginning to believe that. The distance from my family had created space for me to recognize patterns I'd been too close to see clearly before. My tendency to overwork to prove my worth, my reflexive apologies, my assumption that my needs always came last. With Tyler's encouragement, I found a therapist, Dr. Laura Campbell, who specialized in family dynamics and adult children of emotionally inconsistent parents. "You're describing a classic golden child divided by scapegoat dynamic," she told me in our second session. "It's sadly common in many families and it's deeply damaging to both children, though in different ways." "Damaging to both?" I asked, surprised. "Megan's always been the favorite." "Being the golden child comes with its own problems," Dr. Campbell explained. "Your sister never had to develop real competence or resilience because everything was handed to her. She's been denied the opportunity to earn her own achievements or learn from failures. Meanwhile, you've had to be hyper-competent but have developed deep-seated beliefs that you're not worthy of love or attention unless you're perfect." It was a perspective I'd never considered before, that Megan might also be a victim of our parents' dysfunctional favoritism, just in a different way. But understanding the dynamic didn't immediately heal the hurt. As I continued my limited contact with my family, I focused instead on building a life centered around my own values rather than seeking external validation. 3 months after that fateful dinner, my life had transformed in subtle but significant ways. The most obvious change was my limited contact with my family. I spoke to my parents briefly, once every couple of weeks, keeping conversations light and redirecting when they tried to make me feel guilty about my distance. I saw them in person only once for a brief lunch where I left as soon as they started talking about Megan's business preparations. But the deeper changes were internal. With Dr. Campbell's guidance, I was learning to recognize and challenge the beliefs I'd internalized from my family, that I had to earn love through achievement, that my needs were less important than others, that expressing hurt or anger made me dramatic. "Notice how you keep saying you should do things," Dr. Campbell pointed out in one session. "I should call my parents back right away. I should work late to impress my boss. I should be over this by now." Where are those shoulds coming from? I realized most of my shoulds were external expectations I'd absorbed and made my own, particularly from my parents. Identifying them was the first step to challenging whether they actually aligned with my own values. I also began exploring interests beyond work for the first time in years. I joined a community garden, rediscovering a love of growing things that I'd abandoned after college. I signed up for a creative writing class, giving myself permission to be a beginner at something rather than exceptional. I even went to a kickboxing class where I punched and kicked out years of suppressed anger. My relationship with Tyler deepened during this time. He witnessed my struggle without trying to fix it, offering support without judgment. On weekends, we explored parts of Boston I'd never made time to see before, the small museums, hidden parks, and neighborhood festivals that had always seemed frivolous when I was focused solely on achievement. "You seem lighter," he observed one evening as we walked along the Charles River hand in hand. "Like you're not carrying the weight of everyone's expectations anymore." "I'm trying," I agreed. "It's hard to break habits I've had my entire life, but it feels freeing." At work, I found myself taking more calculated risks rather than always playing it safe. I spoke up in meetings instead of deferring to louder voices. I declined unnecessary overtime instead of being the reliable one who always stayed late. To my surprise, my boss responded positively to these changes, even pulling me aside after I successfully challenged a senior partner's approach to a client problem. "You've really come into your own these past few months, Samantha," he said. "It's good to see." The most unexpected opportunity arose from one of these moments of newfound assertiveness. James Warren, the CEO of a promising tech startup, had come to Palmer and Associates for tax consultation. During the meeting, I disagreed with the conservative approach my supervisor suggested, instead outlining a more innovative but still legal tax strategy that would better serve the young company. After the meeting, James approached me directly. "That was impressive," he said. "Most accountants I've worked with are so risk-averse they can't see creative solutions. Would you be interested in getting coffee sometime? I'd love to pick your brain about financial planning for startup." In the past, I might have deferred such an opportunity to a more senior colleague or doubted my own capabilities. Instead, I found myself saying I'd be happy to. That coffee meeting turned into a series of conversations about James's company Vertex Solutions, which was developing software to streamline supply chain management for small businesses. He was brilliant at the technical side but struggling with the financial aspects of growing his business. "What I really need," he admitted during our third meeting, "is someone who understands both finance and the unique challenges of startups. A financial consultant who could help us make smart decisions as we scale." "That sounds like an interesting role," I said, already running numbers in my head. "It is," James agreed, then looked at me directly. "And I think you'd be perfect for it." The offer took me by surprise. I've always worked in traditional accounting. "But you think differently," he insisted. "You see opportunities where others see only risks." That's exactly what Vertex needs right now. It was both exciting and terrifying to consider. Palmer and Associates offered stability, prestige, and a clear career path. James was offering uncertainty challenge and the chance to help build something from the ground up. 2 days later, I was still mulling over the opportunity when my mother made one of her increasingly rare appearances in my life, showing up unannounced at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon. "I was in the neighborhood," she explained, though her designer outfit suggested she hadn't just happened to be in my distinctly unfashionable corner of Somerville. "You've been so busy lately, I thought I'd check in." Translation: "You've been avoiding us, and I want to know why." I offered her tea, and we sat at my small kitchen table in awkward silence until she finally spoke. "Your father and I are concerned about you, Samantha. This distance you're creating isn't healthy." "Actually, Mom, it's been very healthy for me," I replied, surprising both of us with my directness. Her eyebrows rose. "Pulling away from your family is healthy. Since when?" "Since I realized I need to build my life around what makes me happy, not around trying to earn equal treatment that never comes." The words were matter-of-fact, not accusatory, which seemed to confuse her even more. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her gaze sliding away from mine. "We've always treated both our girls the same." Rather than argue the point as I might have in the past, I simply said, "We have different memories of my childhood then." She fidgeted with her teacup, clearly uncomfortable with this new version of me who didn't automatically defer or apologize. "Well, regardless, your sister misses you. Her studio is coming along, you know. She's found a space in Brookline and put down a deposit." "That's nice," I said neutrally. "You should see it. Maybe you could help her with the books. You're so good with numbers." And there it was, the real reason for her visit. Not concern for me, but recruitment for Megan's latest project. "I'm actually quite busy with my own career right now," I said. "In fact, I'm considering a new opportunity." "New opportunity?" My mother looked genuinely surprised, as if it hadn't occurred to her that my life might be changing too. "You're leaving Palmer, but you've worked so hard to get where you are." "Sometimes growth means taking risks," I said, thinking of James's offer. "Speaking of which, I should get going soon. I have plans this afternoon." My mother left shortly after, clearly unsettled by our interaction. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and strength. The conversation confirmed that the patterns in my family were deeply entrenched, but also showed me how much I had changed in just a few months. That evening, I called James and accepted his offer to join Vertex Solutions as their financial consultant. It would mean a significant pay cut initially, but with equity in the company, and the potential for growth that far exceeded what Palmer could offer. When I told Tyler my decision, he lifted me off the ground in a celebratory hug. "I'm so proud of you for taking this leap," he said. "It's terrifying," I admitted. "What if I fail? Then you'll pick yourself up and try something else," he said simply. "That's life. The point is, you're finally living it on your terms. On my terms." The phrase resonated deeply. For the first time, I was making choices based on what I wanted, not what would please my parents or prove my worth. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, exactly as life should be. My last day at Palmer & Associates was bittersweet. I'd spent 5 years building my career there, and while I was excited about my new venture with Vertex Solutions, leaving the familiar was harder than I'd expected. My colleagues threw me a small going-away party, and my supervisor pulled me aside to tell me the door would always be open if things didn't work out. "But between us," he added with a wink, "I don't think you'll be back. You're ready for bigger things than we can offer here." The first day at Vertex was a stark contrast to Palmer's polished corporate environment. James had rented a small office space in a converted warehouse in South Boston. The concrete floors were scuffed, the exposed brick walls bare, except for a few whiteboards covered in code and diagrams I didn't understand. The team consisted of James' 3 developers, a UX designer, and now me. "Welcome to startup life," James said as he showed me to my desk, a folding table with a second-hand office chair. "It's not exactly the corner office you're used to, but we have excellent coffee to compensate." I laughed, already feeling more at home in this scrappy space than I ever had in Palmer's sleek offices. I've never needed much. Just point me to that excellent coffee and I'll get to work. And work I did. The learning curve was vertiginous. I wasn't just handling taxes or bookkeeping anymore. I was involved in every financial aspect of the business. Cash flow projections, investment strategies, pricing models, customer acquisition costs. I had to master it all quickly, while helping James navigate the complex dance of keeping the company alive long enough to reach profitability. After the first month of working 14-hour days, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable to the old Samantha. I invested $25,000 of my own savings into Vertex in exchange for a small equity stake. It was a calculated risk, but I believed in what we were building. More importantly, I believed in my own ability to help make it successful. Tyler was supportive but concerned. "Are you sure about this? That's a big chunk of your safety net." I'm sure, I told him. For once in my life, I want to bet on myself instead of playing it safe. The weeks blurred into months as we refined our software, pitched to potential clients, and stretched every dollar to extend our runway. There were moments of crushing doubt, like when our first major prospect backed out at the last minute, leaving us scrambling to make payroll. There were also moments of pure elation, like landing our first contract with a regional grocery distributor who took a chance on our unproven solution. Through it all, I discovered capabilities I never knew I had. I negotiated deals, developed pitches, and found creative solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable. James increasingly relied on me not just for financial guidance, but for broader business strategy. "You have amazing instincts," he told me after I helped salvage a deal that had nearly fallen apart. "I don't know how we functioned before you joined." 6 months into my new role, I was exhausted but more fulfilled than I'd ever been at Palmer. Vertex was still operating on a shoestring, but we had 5 paying clients and promising conversations with several more. Our software was proving its value in the real world, with customers reporting significant improvements in their operations. It was around this time that my mother made another unexpected appearance, this time at a cafe near Vertex's office, where I sometimes worked when I needed a change of scenery. I was deep in a spreadsheet analysis when she slid into the chair across from me. "Your father told me where your new office was," she explained, answering my unasked question. "I thought we could have lunch." "I only have about 30 minutes, I said, checking my watch. "That's fine." She studied me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You look tired, Samantha." "Startup life," I said with a shrug. "It's intense, but exciting." "I still don't understand why you left Palmer," she said, shaking her head. "You were on such a good path there." "I'm on a better path now," I replied. "One that challenges me in new ways." She looked skeptical. "James Warren doesn't have the reputation Palmer does." What if his company fails? Have you thought about that? I smiled, recognizing her fear of instability, a fear she'd inadvertently instilled in me. Of course I've thought about it. But there's value in taking risks, Mom. Sometimes the uncertain path leads to better destinations. She seemed taken aback by my philosophical response. After a moment, she shifted topics. Well, speaking of uncertain paths, your sister could use your help. Her studio is almost ready to open, but she's struggling with the financial side of things. Setting up accounts, projecting expenses, that sort of thing. Right up your alley. I was unsurprised by the real reason for her visit, but still disappointed. I'm sure there are plenty of accountants who could help her. I really don't have the bandwidth right now. But your family, my mother insisted. She trusts you. I closed my laptop, giving her my full attention. Mom, I'm working 60-hour weeks building a business. I barely have time to do my own laundry, let alone set up Megan's books. I'm sorry, but I can't. Her face fell into familiar lines of disapproval. I don't understand why you're being so selfish lately. This distance you're creating, refusing to help your sister, this isn't like you, Samantha. You're right, I agreed, surprising her. It isn't like the old me. The old me would have dropped everything to help Megan, even at my own expense, because I was desperate for your approval. But I'm learning that I don't need to earn love by sacrificing my own needs. My mother's mouth opened and closed, clearly struggling to process this direct challenge to our family's unspoken rules. That's a very self-centered way of looking at things. Is it? I asked genuinely. Is it self-centered to expect equal treatment, to set healthy boundaries, to prioritize my own well-being sometimes? She had no answer for that, and our conversation limped to an uncomfortable conclusion. As she left, I felt a familiar twinge of guilt for disappointing her, but it was overshadowed by something stronger: pride in standing my ground. When I returned to the office, James noticed my distracted state. Everything okay? You seem off. Family stuff, I said vaguely. Nothing new. He nodded understandingly. Take the afternoon if you need it. We're in good shape for the investor meeting tomorrow. No, work is actually the perfect distraction, I assured him. Besides, I want to review those projections one more time before we present them. Throwing myself back into work, I pushed thoughts of my family aside. This was where I belonged now, building something meaningful with people who valued my contribution. The next day's investor meeting went better than we could have hoped. Our presentation was sharp, our numbers compelling, and our existing client testimonials provided the social proof we needed. By the end of the day, we had a tentative commitment for a $500,000 investment that would allow us to expand our team and accelerate development of the next version of our software. James was practically floating as we left the meeting. We did it, he kept saying. We actually did it. We did, I agreed, equally elated but already thinking about next steps. Now comes the hard part: living up to their expectations. He threw an arm around my shoulders as we walked back to the office. With you watching our finances, I'm not worried. Best decision I ever made was getting you to join Vertex. His casual confidence in me was still sometimes startling. After a lifetime of being second best in my family's eyes, being truly valued for my skills and judgment was a profound shift. That evening, riding the high of our success, I did something impulsive. I put an offer on a condo in South End. It was a beautiful one-bedroom in a historic building, far more character than my current practical apartment, and in a neighborhood I'd always loved but never thought I could afford. With my equity in Vertex now potentially worth something, and a small inheritance from my grandmother that I'd been saving, I could just make it work. When the offer was accepted 3 days later, I felt a rush of both terror and exhilaration. This was what living on my terms looked like, making bold choices that served my happiness, not others' expectations. Tyler brought champagne to celebrate when I got the keys. As we sat on the bare floor of my new living room toasting my purchase with plastic cups, he asked, "Have you told your parents about the condo?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm still getting used to the idea myself. They might be impressed," he suggested. "This is a big accomplishment," maybe I said, though I doubted it. But I didn't buy it to impress them. I bought it because it made me happy. He clinked his cup against mine. "To doing things that make you happy. It looks good on you." As I settled into my new home and Vertex continued to grow, I felt myself becoming more centered, more confident. The voice in my head that constantly questioned my worth grew quieter, though it never disappeared entirely. "Dr. Campbell assured me that was normal. Old wounds heal but often leave scars. The goal isn't to erase your past," she told me. "It's to keep it from controlling your future." 9 months after that fateful dinner, I had created a life that reflected my own values rather than my parents' expectations. I had a fulfilling career, a beautiful home, a loving relationship, and a growing sense of peace with who I was. And then, just as I was finding my equilibrium, my family pulled me back into their orbit with a crisis that tested my newfound boundaries to their limits. The call came on a Tuesday evening, as I was reviewing Vertex's quarterly projections. My father's name flashed on my phone screen, unusual enough these days to give me pause. We spoke briefly every few weeks, our conversations stilted and superficial since I'd begun maintaining boundaries. "Dad," I answered, a note of concern in my voice. "Samantha." His tone was grave. "We need to talk. It's about your sister's business." Something in his voice made me set aside my laptop and give him my full attention. "What about it?" "It's in trouble. Serious trouble." He sighed heavily. "She's 3 months behind on rent for the studio space, and there are unpaid vendor bills piling up. Your mother and I just found out today." I closed my eyes, unsurprised but still disappointed. "I'm sorry to hear that. Has she been talking to her accountant about options?" "That's the thing," he admitted. "She never hired a proper accountant. She's been trying to handle the books herself, and it's a mess. We need your help, Samantha." The old familiar pull of family obligation tugged at me. "Dad, I'm really busy with my own business right now." "This is family," he interrupted, his voice hardening. "Your mother and I are asking for your help. Don't you think you owe us that much?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken history. Did I owe them? After years of unequal treatment, after the $75,000 they'd given Megan while expecting me to make my own way? Did I owe them my expertise, now that Megan had mismanaged their investment? "I can meet with you all to discuss options," I said, finally choosing my words carefully. "But I want to be clear, I can offer advice, but I can't take over Megan's books or bail out the business. I don't have the time or the emotional bandwidth for that." My father was silent for a moment, clearly displeased with my qualified offer. "Fine. Tomorrow night at our house. 7 o'clock. The next evening, I arrived at my parents' house with a notebook and a firm grip on my boundaries. My mother answered the door with a hug that felt more like a plea than an affection. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading me into the dining room where my father and sister already sat at the table, a spread of papers between them. Megan barely looked up when I entered, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. Her normally perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Let's get straight to the point," my father said as I took a seat. "Megan's studio is facing some financial challenges. We need to figure out how to right the ship." "When did the studio open?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. 4 months ago," Megan muttered. "The grand opening was great. We had a full class schedule for the first 2 weeks. And then, numbers dropped off. It turns out there are 3 other boutique fitness places within a 5-block radius. The competition is killer." I nodded, unsurprised. "Was a competitive analysis part of your business plan?" Megan looked away. "I didn't really have a formal business plan. I had a vision board and financial projections based on full classes. It took effort to keep my expression neutral." "I see. And what's the current financial situation specifically?" My father pushed several papers toward me, bank statements, invoices, and a handwritten ledger that made my accountant's soul cringe. As I reviewed them, the picture became clear. Megan had burned through the $75,000 from my parents, plus another $30,000 from a high-interest business loan. The studio was losing approximately $8,000 per month with no signs of improvement. "This is challenging," I said diplomatically after reviewing everything. "The core issue seems to be that operating costs far exceed revenue and there's no marketing strategy to increase clientele." "So what do we do?" my mother asked, anxiety clear in her voice. I laid out 3 options: dramatically cut costs and redouble marketing efforts, bring in a business partner with capital and expertise, or close the studio and try to minimize losses. "Close." Megan looked horrified. "I can't close. This is my dream." "Dreams need viable business models," I said gently. "Right now you're losing money every day you stay open." "Your sister is right," my father said, surprising me. "We need to be realistic." Megan's eyes filled with tears. "So that's it, you're all giving up on me?" "No one's giving up," I assured her. "But continuing on the current path without changes isn't an option. You need more capital and expertise to make this work." "Well, that's why you're here, isn't it?" Megan looked at me expectantly. "You're the financial expert. You can fix this." And there it was, the assumption that I would swoop in and rescue her, just as our parents always had. The expectation that my time, my expertise, my emotional labor were resources to be tapped whenever she found herself in trouble. I can advise you, I said carefully, but I can't take this on as a project. I have my own business that requires my full attention. You have a job, Megan has a business, my mother corrected, the distinction in her mind clear. Surely you can spare some time to help your sister. Vertex Solutions isn't just a job, Mom. I'm a partner in the company. We're growing rapidly and at a critical stage. I simply don't have the bandwidth to rescue another business. It sounds like you don't want to help, Megan accused, her tone turning bitter. You're probably happy to see me fail, aren't you, to finally have proof that you're the successful sister and I'm the screw-up. The accusation stung especially because it was so far from the truth. I didn't want to see Megan fail. I just refused to set myself on fire to keep her warm anymore. That's not fair, I said. I'm here, aren't I? I'm offering advice and perspective. But I can't fix this for you, Megan. No one can except you. Some sister you are, she spat. The one time I ask for your help and you're too busy with your precious startup. The one time I repeated, a spark of anger flaring despite my resolve to stay calm. Megan, our entire lives have been about helping you. Mom and Dad gave you $75,000 for this business, without requiring a business plan or any evidence you could make it work. They paid for your college, your apartment, your car. They've always been there to bail you out while I've had to make it on my own. Here we go again with the jealousy, Megan rolled her eyes. I'm so tired of your victim complex. Enough, my father interrupted. This isn't helping anything. Samantha, what would you recommend as the next steps? I took a deep breath, pushing down the hurt and anger. If you want to save the studio, you need 3 things: capital to cover losses, while you rebuild a drastically reduced cost structure, and a marketing strategy to differentiate yourself from competitors. I suggest bringing in a business consultant who specializes in small retail businesses, preferably someone with experience in the fitness industry. That costs money we don't have, Megan objected. Then the other option is to close before you go further into debt, I said bluntly. Those are the realistic choices. My parents exchanged a look I recognized from childhood. The what are we going to do about this look they'd shared so many times when Megan was in trouble. What if we put in more money, my mother suggested. Just enough to keep things afloat until the business finds its footing. I shook my head. Throwing good money after bad isn't a strategy. Without fundamental changes to the business model, you'll just delay the inevitable. Easy for you to say, Megan muttered. Your business is doing great and you have investors. Not all of us are as perfect as Samantha. The barb was so familiar it almost made me laugh. This was the same dynamic that had played out our entire lives. Megan creating problems, my parents rushing to fix them, and me cast as the villain for pointing out reality. I think we've gone as far as we can tonight, I said, standing up. I've given you my professional assessment and recommendations. What you do with that information is up to you. You're leaving. My mother looked shocked. We haven't decided anything yet. It's not my decision to make, I pointed out. It's Megan's business. But we need your help, my father insisted. I've helped as much as I can right now, I replied, gathering my things. If Megan wants to implement any of my suggestions, she can call me, but I can't make these decisions for her. As I headed for the door, my mother followed me. Samantha, please. Your sister needs you. We're family. I turned to face her, suddenly weary of the same old patterns. Yes, we're family, and I love you all, but that doesn't mean I'm responsible for fixing Megan's problems. She's 26 years old, Mom. At some point, she needs to learn to stand on her own. The way you had to. My mother's question was quiet with an unexpected note of self-awareness. I paused, surprised. Yes, exactly that way. The drive home was emotionally exhausting, but as I pulled into my parking space, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I had maintained my boundaries in the face of family pressure. I had offered what I could give, my professional advice, without sacrificing my own well-being or taking responsibility for problems that weren't mine to solve. Tyler was waiting at my condo with takeout and a sympathetic ear. As we ate, I recounted the meeting and its predictable dynamics. I'm proud of you, he said when I finished. Standing up to family patterns is incredibly hard, and you did it with grace. It didn't feel graceful, I admitted. It felt awful. I hate seeing Megan in trouble, even though part of me thinks she needs to experience consequences for once. That's because you're a good person who loves her family, Tyler pointed out. Having boundaries doesn't mean you don't care. The following week brought the news I'd half expected. My parents had given Megan another $30,000 to save the studio, ignoring all my advice about the need for fundamental business changes. The money came with no accountability mechanisms, no business consultant, no real plan beyond keeping the doors open a little longer. When my mother called to tell me, her voice held a defensive challenge, as if daring me to criticize their decision. "I hope it works out," I said simply. "You don't think it will," she noted. "I think throwing money at problems without addressing their root causes rarely solves anything," I replied. "But it's your money and your choice." After hanging up, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: frustration at watching them repeat patterns that had never worked, sadness at being excluded from the family narrative once again, but also a strange relief. For the first time, I wasn't tangled in their dysfunction. I could observe it from a distance without being wounded by it. That evening, I received a text from Megan that simply said, "I hope you're happy now." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't escalate a conflict I had no desire to feed. Instead, I channeled my energy into my own business, my relationship with Tyler, and the new life I was building brick by brick. A life defined by my choices, not by my family's expectations or limitations. And as painful as the family crisis had been, it had given me something valuable: confirmation that the boundaries I'd established were not just necessary but life-saving. Without them, I would have been sucked back into old patterns that benefited everyone except me. For the first time, I was choosing myself. And that choice was changing everything. 1 year after that fateful family dinner where my parents had handed Megan the $75,000 check, I stood in the lobby of Boston's Westin Hotel, adjusting my blazer nervously. Vertex Solutions had been nominated for a Regional Business Innovation Award, and James and I were attending the gala as representatives of our now thriving company. "Stop fidgeting," James said with a grin. "You look great." "I'm not used to being on this side of business events," I admitted. "Usually I'm the accountant in the back room, not the person on stage." "Well, get used to it. You're the face of our financial strategy and people want to hear from you." The past year had transformed Vertex from a scrappy startup to a respected player in supply chain management software. The $500,000 investment we'd secured had allowed us to hire 3 additional developers and a dedicated sales team. We'd moved from our warehouse space to proper offices in the Innovation District. Most significantly, we'd landed 2 major clients whose success stories had opened doors throughout the industry. My role had evolved too. I was now officially Chief Financial Officer with a small team reporting to me. The equity stake I'd taken early on was now worth considerably more than my initial investment, and my salary had finally surpassed what I'd earned at Palmer. Inside the ballroom, I spotted several familiar faces from Boston's business community, including my former supervisor from Palmer who came over to congratulate us on the nomination. "I always knew you were destined for bigger things," he said, shaking my hand warmly. Palmer's loss was definitely Vertex's gain. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches and applause. When our category was announced, Emerging Business Technology Sector, I held my breath. Against the odds, we won. James practically bounded onto the stage, while I followed more sedately, still processing the reality that our hard work was being recognized so publicly. As James thanked our team and investors in his acceptance speech, he did something unexpected. "But the person who truly deserves credit for Vertex's success is our CFO, Samantha Reynolds," he said, gesturing for me to step forward. Sam joined us when we were working out of a warehouse with folding tables for desks. She believed in our vision enough to invest her own money when we were still a high-risk venture. Her financial strategy has been the backbone of our growth, and every member of our team is grateful for her leadership. The applause was surreal as I stepped up to the microphone. Public speaking had never been my forte, but I managed to thank our team, our clients, and James for his partnership before we left the stage with our trophy. The next morning, a regional business magazine ran a feature on the award winners, including a photo of James and me accepting the trophy and a sidebar profiling Vertex as a startup to watch. By midday, my phone was buzzing with congratulatory messages from colleagues, former classmates, and even a few old clients from Palmer. The most surprising message came from my father. "Saw your picture in Business Weekly. Congratulations. Your mother and I are proud." It was the first time in memory that he had expressed pride in my achievements without qualifying it or immediately shifting focus to Megan. The acknowledgement was both gratifying and strangely hollow. I no longer needed their approval the way I once had. That evening, Tyler surprised me with champagne and takeout from my favorite restaurant. To celebrate your well-deserved recognition, he explained, pouring 2 glasses in my kitchen. As we settled on my couch, he took my hand, suddenly serious. I have something I've been wanting to ask you. My heart quickened as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Samantha Reynolds, watching you come into your own this past year has been incredible. You've shown me what courage and self-respect really look like. I can't imagine my life without you, and I don't want to try. Will you marry me? The ring inside was perfect, a simple emerald-cut diamond in a vintage setting, elegant and understated, exactly my taste. More importantly, the man holding it really knew me, and loved me not for what I could do for him but for who I was. Yes, I said through happy tears. Absolutely yes. Later that week, I closed on a beautiful condo in downtown Boston, using some of my Vertex equity as down payment. It was a spacious 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a small balcony overlooking the harbor, a dramatic upgrade from the practical apartment I'd lived in for years. Tyler and I discussed him moving in after the wedding, though we were in no rush to plan the ceremony. As I unpacked boxes in my new home, I came across a photo from my college graduation, me in cap and gown, flanked by my parents and Megan. Everyone was smiling, but looking at it now, I could see the tension in my posture, the way I leaned slightly away from my family, already distancing myself emotionally, if not physically. I put the photo aside, unsure if I wanted to display it. So much had changed since then, not just in my circumstances, but in how I understood my family and my place in it. Speaking of family, I hadn't heard much about Megan's business since the night of our tense meeting, but I wasn't surprised when my mother called with an update that confirmed my predictions. Megan's decided to close the studio, she said, her tone suggesting this was a mature business decision rather than the inevitable result of poor planning and execution. She's telling everyone it's because of the economy and the bad location. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. I took no pleasure in my sister's failure despite her accusation that I would. She's thinking about going back to school for marketing, my mother continued. She's always been so creative. I murmured agreement, choosing not to point out that this would be Megan's 3rd attempt at higher education, again presumably funded by our parents. We saw your picture in the magazine, my mother added, changing the subject. Your father showed it to everyone at his golf club, and we heard about your engagement too. Tyler seems like a nice young man. He is, I agreed, touched despite myself that my father had bragged about me to his friends. We're very happy. Well, we should have you both over for dinner soon. To celebrate? The invitation was casual but represented a subtle shift in our family dynamic. For the first time, my parents seemed to be acknowledging my success and happiness as something worth celebrating. That would be nice, I said, though I made no specific commitments. The truth was, my relationship with my family had evolved to a place I could never have imagined a year earlier. I spoke to my parents every couple of weeks, brief, cordial conversations that skimmed the surface of our lives. I saw them occasionally for holidays or brief dinners, but the emotional tether that had once bound me to their approval had been severed. Megan and I maintained an even more distant relationship. She had sent a terse congratulatory text about my engagement, but otherwise communicated primarily through passive-aggressive social media posts about people who think they're better than everyone else. I wished her well, but no longer felt responsible for her feelings about me or my success. At work, Vertex continued to thrive. We expanded into new markets, developed additional features for our software, and built a reputation for excellence in our niche. James and I worked well together, complementing each other's strengths and challenging each other to grow. The business magazine that had covered our award win reached out for a follow-up story, this time focusing specifically on women in Boston's tech sector. The reporter interviewed me for over an hour, asking thoughtful questions about my career path and the challenges of being a female executive in a male-dominated industry. When the article came out, it featured a professional photo of me in our offices looking confident and composed. The headline read, "Breaking Barriers: How Samantha Reynolds is Changing the Game in Tech Finance." My phone lit up with notifications as colleagues and friends shared the article. Among the messages was one from my high school economics teacher, who had encouraged my interest in finance years ago. "Always knew you were going places, Samantha. So proud to see where your journey has taken you." But the most unexpected response came during a casual Sunday brunch with Tyler. My phone rang with Megan's number, a rare enough occurrence that I nearly let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Hello. I saw your article," Megan said without preamble. Her voice sounded different, subdued, perhaps even a little chastened. "It was really good. You seem like you're doing well." Thanks, I replied, unsure where this was heading. I am. There was a pause, and then Megan said something I never expected to hear from her. I've been thinking about things a lot since my business failed, about patterns and stuff. And I just wanted to say, I think I understand a little better now why you pulled away from us. From the family, I mean. I waited, stunned into silence. It's hard, she continued, when everything you try falls apart. When you realize you don't actually know how to do things on your own. And I've been thinking about how you always had to figure everything out yourself, while I always had mom and dad to bail me out. It wasn't easy, I admitted. No, I guess it wasn't. Another pause. Anyway, I just wanted to say congratulations. On the article, the business, your engagement. All of it. You worked hard and you deserve it. Those 3 words, you deserve it. The same words my father had used about Megan at that fateful dinner, now directed at me by my sister herself, carried a weight that nearly brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Megan. That means a lot. After we hung up, Tyler squeezed my hand. You okay? Yeah, I said, surprised to find it was true. I think I actually am. The conversation with Megan wasn't a magical fix for years of family dysfunction. We didn't suddenly become best friends or confidants. But it was an acknowledgement, however small, that the patterns I'd identified were real. That my feelings were valid. That my success was earned. And somehow, that simple recognition from the person who had benefited most from our family's unequal dynamic felt like the most meaningful award I could have received. 18 months after the family dinner that had changed everything, I stood in the kitchen of my downtown Boston condo, arranging a tray of appetizers while Tyler checked the turkey in the oven. It was our first time hosting Thanksgiving, a decision we'd made partly out of convenience for our friends who lived in the city, and partly as a subtle reclaiming of family tradition on my own terms. Nervous, Tyler asked, closing the oven door. A little, I admitted. Hosting my parents and Megan along with our friends is an experiment. A bold one, he agreed, kissing my temple. But I think it's going to be great. Everyone on neutral territory plus the buffer of friends who adore you. What could go wrong? When you put it that way, only about a dozen things, I laughed. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of our first guests. To my relief, it was James and his girlfriend Lisa, followed quickly by my friend Rachel from the community garden and her husband. Having allies present before my family arrived helped calm my nerves. My parents showed up exactly on time, bearing a store-bought pie and a bottle of wine. My mother immediately complimented the condo, though I caught the surprise in her eyes as she took in the harbor view and high-end furnishings. This is quite a place, Samantha, my father said, looking around with what seemed like genuine appreciation. You've done well for yourself. Thanks, Dad, I replied, accepting the small acknowledgement with grace. Vertex has been good to me. Megan arrived last, looking more subdued than her usual self. Since the closure of her fitness studio, she had indeed gone back to school, this time for a certificate in digital marketing. According to my mother, she was doing well in her classes and had lined up an internship for the spring. Nice place, she said, handing me a bouquet of flowers. Very you. Thanks, I replied, recognizing the gesture for what it was, an olive branch, however small. Dinner proceeded more smoothly than I dared hope. The presence of friends diluted the family dynamics that might otherwise have dominated. Conversation flowed easily around the table, from James's amusing startup stories to Rachel's adventures in urban gardening. My parents seemed genuinely interested in my friends' lives, asking thoughtful questions and offering stories of their own. I noticed subtle shifts in how they interacted with me as well. My father asked specific questions about Vertex's growth strategies. My mother complimented my cooking, without immediately suggesting how it could be improved. Small changes perhaps, but significant in what they represented. Most surprising was Megan, who seemed to be making a conscious effort to engage rather than compete. When the conversation turned to my upcoming wedding plans, she offered suggestions without trying to take over. When James praised my financial acumen, she nodded in agreement instead of rolling her eyes or changing the subject. After dinner, as the group broke into smaller conversations, I found myself alone with Megan in the kitchen as I brewed coffee. This is really nice, she said, leaning against the counter. You've built a good life here. Thank you, I replied. It's been a journey. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night when you came over to try to help with my business. About how I've always had mom and dad to bail me out and you never did. I nodded, waiting. I was angry at the time, but you were right. I never learned how to stand on my own because I never had to. She twisted a napkin in her hands. I'm trying to now. That's partly why I went back to school instead of asking them for money to start another business. That's great, Megan. Really, it's hard, she admitted with a small laugh. Being responsible for yourself. I don't know how you did it all those years. I didn't have a choice, I said simply. But honestly, I think it made me stronger in the long run. Yeah, she agreed. I think I'm finally starting to understand that. We rejoined the others for dessert, the conversation turning to plans for the holidays and the new year ahead. As I looked around the table at Tyler, at our friends, at my family with all their flaws and complications, I felt a sense of contentment that had once seemed impossible. Later, after everyone had gone and Tyler and I were cleaning up, he asked, "So was it as stressful as you feared?" "Actually no," I said, surprised by my own answer. "It was nice. Different but nice." "Your parents seem to be really trying," he observed. And Megan was almost humble. "It's like they're finally seeing you." Maybe I agreed. Or maybe I'm finally seeing them clearly without needing them to be something they're not. That was the real change I realized as I loaded the dishwasher. I no longer needed my parents' approval or recognition to feel worthy. I no longer measured my success against Megan's failures or my value against their uneven affection. I had built a life that fulfilled me, surrounded by people who saw and appreciated me for exactly who I was. The journey from that painful family dinner to this moment had been difficult, sometimes heartbreaking, but ultimately transformative. I had discovered that sometimes the best response to your sister deserves it wasn't resentment or rivalry, but recognition of my own worth independent of their assessment. My relationship with my family would never be perfect. The old patterns still emerged sometimes, though less frequently and with less power to wound. My parents still showed subtle favoritism toward Megan, but I could now observe it with compassion rather than pain. Megan and I would likely never be close in the way some sisters were, but we were finding a new, more honest dynamic based on mutual respect rather than competition. As Tyler and I settled on the couch with glasses of wine watching the lights of boats on the harbor, I reflected on how far I'd come since that night when I'd sat in my car outside my parents' house sobbing with the realization that nothing I did would ever be enough for them. The truth was, I no longer needed it to be. I had found my own definition of enough in my work at Vertex, in my relationship with Tyler, in my friendships, and in my growing sense of self-worth. I had learned to validate myself rather than seeking validation from others, especially those who had proven unable to give it. "Penny for your thoughts," Tyler said, noticing my contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about how much has changed," I replied, "not just externally with work and the condo and everything, but inside me. A year and a half ago I was still desperately trying to earn my parents' approval. Now I'm just living my life on my terms." "And how does it feel?" I smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Like freedom, like finally being home in my own skin." As we sat there together planning our future, I felt profound gratitude for the painful awakening that had started it all. That family dinner, with its blatant favoritism and dismissal of my feelings, had been the catalyst for the most important journey of my life. Not the path to my parents' approval, but the path to my own self-acceptance. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've worked twice as hard for half the recognition, if you've wondered why your achievements are taken for granted while others are celebrated, know that you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the strength, resilience, and compassion you bring to the world. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and ultimately for your family, is to step back and create a life defined by your own values rather than others' expectations. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family to protect your own well-being? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for being part of my journey, and remember, you deserve to be seen, heard, and valued exactly as you are.